Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Melissa Anderson. Melissa is the Executive Vice President and CHRO of Duke Energy, a Fortune 500 company that is the largest energy holding company in the United States. Thank you very much for coming on to campus. We sincerely appreciate having you here. It's clear now HR has a seat at the table and we don't have to talk about those kind of things. But can you say a little bit about where you think HR can drive business success the most kind of over the next 4 or 5 years?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. It's really my pleasure. And I will tell you that I think HR's future is one that's embedded into every business aspect. So, I like to think about HR being at the table for the strategy formation. And as companies are thinking about the strategy, thinking about their human capital as a big component of strategies. They're thinking about what markets to address, what their competitive advantages are, and then thinking about, how do you build the capability that you need to then move into execution of the strategy. And then it's really an iterative process. And so, I like to tease my CEO, or she likes to tease me, because, she says, I see everything as an HR problem. And I said, I've yet to be wrong. So I think that it all, as you think about any of the things that we go off to do as a company, thinking about talent and how you have the right people and the right capability. And in today's world, that's more of a mix of digital as well as human, and even being more intentional about how the two work together is something I think that HR is going to be right at the table and helping forge the new way forward.
So we certainly believe that and preach that down here, but it comes as a surprise to people that are not familiar with kind of modern HR. Mm-hmm. So can you say a little bit? Let's just choose one like marketing you brought up, for instance. Mm-hmm. So when you're engaged with chief marketing officer and you're at and the CEO and talking about marketing plans or marketing strategy, how does that become an HR issue also?
Yeah. So, there's never been an area or a discipline that is more influenced by the human psyche, and understanding what motivates people. And you take it to its most extreme, a company like Facebook or Amazon or a Twitter in the social media space. Those are the biggest opportunities for marketing to customers. And in those spaces, they use a lot of psychometrics and a lot of psychology theory about how do you get people interested. And in many cases, they go a step further into how do you get them addicted to the likes on their phone on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. And so, people want, they want the affirmation of the likes, of the follows. And, as part of that goes into their product design, that goes into the experience and their brand. So, at the heart of that is the customer, and having the right talent that understands the psychology and the human element of how that product could be appealing to their customer or client set is really important.
So this is really interesting because generally I think there's this misperception in the world that HR is really just inward functioning. How do we help our people or maybe pay them or something like that? But everything you've said so far has been outward facing, really looking out at the marketplace and the clients. Is that right? Is that accurate about that HR really is outward facing that way, at least in part?
Well, so I go back to my Psychology 101, and you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I think all of the internal facing things that we do, they all contribute to the hygiene factor. So as you think about our job to attract, develop, and retain, has a lot to do with the pay, the benefits, the development pieces. And then as you move up the hierarchy and it's you're moving into the perform and actualization, that's where you have the magic, and that's where the value capture is for corporations.
Okay. And you talked about helping the whole company make these kind of decisions. So can you describe a little bit about what is an executive leadership team like? Like, is it really a team, or there's some people out there that have this perception that it's just a number of high performers that are individuals that don't really make a team?
Well, I think that's a $50,000 question. And I would say in utopia, it is a team that's aligned around the same goals and vision for the company. But, I think in the best performing companies, they're able to work together and to have honest conversations and team effectiveness exercises so that they can work through and have constructive discourse. My personal experience has been that's more the exception than the rule in most corporations. But on the other hand, you see more and more companies aspiring to that. You see companies like Microsoft working with a Daniel Pink and really thinking about the employee experience, which is formed through leadership and leadership development. And, I think we're at a great inflection point because I think I read more and more about companies really being more intentional about, creating an experience that is truer to the purpose of the company. So I think it's I think it's growing, and I think it's all led by the senior leadership team. And if the senior leaders aren't committed and aren't modeling it, it won't happen as readily or as consistently across the organization.
So I think I heard you say there that means that ideally that executive leadership team would be a cohesive team functioning that then they could model for the rest of the company. So does that also fall under the purview of the Chief Human Resource Officer to help develop the team aspect of it?
Oh, absolutely. I think CEOs rely on the HR person to be both a member of the team, but also to be an outside observer of the team, advising the CEO on how do you drive that cohesiveness, because senior leadership teams are like any other teams. They have moments of brilliance and moments of huge opportunity, and the brilliance comes when the team holds one another accountable for how they show up. And if one of them, kind of steps aside and becomes very silo driven, then you miss the strength of the entire team. And that sometimes the CEO needs to hear from the CHRO, because that's really important in terms of driving team dynamics. But also more importantly than that is when a senior member of the team acts in the interest of their own team and not the collective good, that sends ripples across the whole company.
So can you say a little bit more about that? What does that really mean when they act in the interest of their own team and not the collective or the overall group?
So a lot of times companies are placing multiple bets depending on market dynamics, and a lot of companies have to cannibalize their own businesses to continue to grow. And because of that, you're creating a little bit of natural competition for resources, because every company wishes they had more time, resources, and money. So a really strong and high-performing senior leadership team comes together and says, okay, here's our set of priorities, and then they align their capital behind those priorities, which means a lot of times the senior leaders going back to their team saying, what we do is super important, but it is not the most important thing in terms of the investment of capital in this moment. So we're going to have to work together because we have to do the following things for the overall health of the company. And those are tough conversations.
That sounds like it. It sounds like it puts you all in a very interesting position where you have the people that you're responsible for. So that would be whether it's the CFO in finance or you in HR. And you're saying, I think what I'm hearing you say is that you have to be, even though that's the group you're responsible for and accountable for, you have to be putting the needs of the whole company, which would be everyone else that's on that executive leadership team, that it has to be first and foremost for the good of the overall company, and then your own line. That sounds really quite challenging.
It is, and we always talk about putting on your oxygen mask and and helping others, and so for a company like Duke, it's easier because we're always putting the need to the customers first. So the majority of our employee population is out there putting their lives on hold to go drive to a storm and help restore it. So it's a company that the culture is a service-led culture. So, in our case, I think it's a little bit easier, but it's definitely not easy.
So can we talk a little bit about the differences across industry that way? So you just mentioned Duke Energy has it's very customer focused and service focused, and for obvious and good reasons. But you also had a very long, successful career at IBM. Can you talk a little bit like what's the difference across industries from an HR leader perspective?
Well, it's interesting because IBM was also a very service-led culture. And so when I was at IBM, I couldn't imagine being anywhere but in the technology industry, because I believed with every fiber of my body that advancing technology was going to make people healthier, make the world more efficient, make better decisions. And so, at a company like IBM that was so big, majority of the company doesn't see the competition for resources, and it's much more localized within, segments of the business. But I would say in an industry like IT, which moves so quickly, there is such a real threat of somebody else disrupting you, that need to innovate and to be better every day really is much more present than at a company like Duke, which, disruption, when you have the big infrastructure that we have, is a lot different. So that feels different.
Are there some principles that you think are really dramatically different or necessarily the same across these different kind of industries?
I think that we talk a lot about customizing your role, your view of what the ultimate leader looks like. And I think that a lot of the leadership attributes transcends industries. And I think the heightened importance of it, of the type of leadership attributes that you're looking for, varies industry to industry. So, in a company like IBM, it's innovate or die. And I think a company or an industry, manufacturing or a utility or energy industry group, the emphasis is more on operational excellence. And so the challenge is going to be creating, not letting the rest of the team lose sight of the need to innovate, because you have to innovate and drive operational excellence, whereas at an IBM, it's inverted. Because you've got to, when you roll out a software product, it has to be bug free, and in this world, that's harder and harder to do with all the cyber threats. But if you don't innovate, you will die. And if you are not operationally excellent, you'll be wounded, but it probably won't be mortally fatal.
And I know, and one last topic to talk about it, because I know we have talked about it in the past, and it's important to you, and that is getting better representation at the executive leadership team and then on corporate boards, of course. And as obviously an extremely successful woman who's on the executive leadership team and working with one of the very few women CEOs of such large corporations, do you have thoughts on what we can do as society to do this better?
Absolutely. So having grown up at IBM, I took for granted that most people accepted the fact that you needed to create a flexible work environment and not just count on FaceTime and being together in a physical proximity, because I always had virtual teams, and I also worked in a matrixed environment. So what I will tell you is that if you want to advance diverse talent, you're going to have to create a work environment that enables people to have families, to have outside lives, to work in a way that they're comfortable. And I don't think we, as senior leaders, know what that looks like and feels like unless you get diverse people to the table. And I think it's a little bit of a paradox in that way. But I think through councils and discussions, you can help to seed the way. In many ways, I would say over the last 5 years, we've kind of taken a step back just because we've done more human-centered design from a product standpoint. Those teams tend to work better in intact teams. And so, design groups that are really driving innovative products and services require, in today's environment, more face-to-face interaction.
Yes, and we certainly see that for a while, there was a big push that we wanted everyone to work virtually, and now we're definitely seeing many more companies bring people back in. So have we really stepped back now? I mean, is there a way to balance the two, this flexibility of work schedule with creating the culture that has people working together to be innovative and creative?
Yeah, I think it's harder to do. And I think there are great products out there that make working virtually together as teams, where you can use video conference. The video conferencing technology is cheaper, better today, but it's an investment. It's an investment and a commitment of the company, and but it also requires an intentionality of those who are on the team, because if you have we'll say 7 men in a room and 1 woman who's telecommuting in, that woman may have a harder time breaking into a conversation if she's home with a sick child.
For sure, breaking into the conversation, the meaningful work conversation, but then that only becomes part of what creates that social bond, right? Because then she'll get off the call and they will still be there going to lunch or whatever is happening. So is there a way? Is this an impossible task? Can we actually overcome this?
Absolutely. It's not an impossible task, but I think like we said before, it takes intentionality and it takes action, and it takes very deliberate action, and it is everything from making it a company commitment and measuring it like you would any other corporate commitment, and then it takes doing all the enabling types of work that you have to do besides just saying we're going to have a more diverse and inclusive workforce, and measuring that. But then you have to you have to teach people. You have to create an awareness around what it takes as a leader to make sure that you are creating an inclusive environment for your employees, especially if you want to have some of your most talented people rise up and they're not positioned to do so in a traditional way.
So does that mean even holding managers accountable for the diversity of their own teams and how much they're mentoring or promoting people and throughout the company?
Absolutely. That's probably one of the most important things that you can do. Because if you just say it's important to us and you don't measure it, the old saying is what gets measured gets done. And you see it, you see outside investors also driving a lot of focus and attention to it, and making it mandates versus just the right thing to do.
Thank you very much for this conversation, and as always, thank you for coming down to campus. We sincerely appreciate having you here.
Thank you. Appreciate being invited.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today, Melissa Anderson of Duke Energy shared her views regarding the role of HR in driving business success. She also shared ideas for how HR drives company culture to help advance company success while helping to improve customer experiences. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.